This is CNN Breaking News.
And welcome back. Big news morning here. Following the breaking news out of the Middle East, U.S. Ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stephens, has been killed along with 3 other embassy staff members.
They were targeted by a rocket as they were leaving the ambassador's car for a safer venue during that violence that erupted in Benghazi yesterday. We now want to bring in former Speaker to the House, Newt Gingrich. Mr. Gingrich is in our Washington bureau right now. And Mr. Speaker, this is a tragedy for the entire U.S., for the diplomatic community. What do you make of what's happening on the ground right now in Libya?
Well, first of all, I think all of our prayers should go out to all 4 families who gave their lives on behalf of the United States. These are truly soldiers of freedom as much as anybody in Afghanistan or Iraq. We should all recognize that. I also think we should back up a half step and realize this is not just about Libya. You don't get simultaneously attacks in Benghazi and Cairo, in Libya and Egypt, on a purely local basis. And you don't get them on 9/11, a day where we are already honoring terrorist attacks against the United States, without a fair amount of collusion and a fair amount of planning. So I think you have to look at this in a larger context. It doesn't matter if the average Libyan likes us or dislikes us. There's a substantial faction, particularly in Benghazi, which was sending people to Iraq to kill Americans. There's a substantial faction in Egypt which wants to defeat the United States and destroy Israel. That faction looks for opportunities to do things to hurt the United States, and yesterday was an example of an attack that's part of a very long war that we're going to be at, I think, for a very, very long time. And we need to have an honest national conversation about how serious this war is.
Mr. Speaker, you connected the dots between the demonstrations in Cairo, the demonstrations in Libya, and the assassination of the U.S. ambassador there. Do you have any proof that there's a connection right now? Let's just establish that.
Okay, so you have, you're suggesting we have spontaneously.
No, I just wanted to know if you knew something that we did.
No. Look, I don't have access to the NSA listening devices. I don't know what our various people think, but I have looked at this long enough, going back to 1979. And looking, frankly, before that at the Palestinian terror operations in the 70s, that anybody who's ever studied terrorism will tell you there's almost certainly a link. This is a lot like the Danish cartoon outrage a few years ago, which happened to simultaneously appear in country after country. It wasn't simultaneous. We are faced with enemies who want to defeat the United States and impose their radical views. We're a country that believes in religious liberty. We believe in freedom of speech. How can the U.S. government apologize for a film no one has seen, which is what the embassy in Cairo did yesterday? This is part of a much longer struggle, and I think you have to connect these larger dots. It's not just about an event in Libya. It's about a longer war, part of which we were being reminded of yesterday on 9/11.
Mr. Speaker, this is Brooke Baldwin. If I may interject here, we have now gotten confirmation from the White House on the death of Ambassador Stephens, and I just want to read the first graph of a multi-graph email statement from the White House. I strongly condemn the outrageous attack on our diplomatic facility in Benghazi, which took the lives of 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stephens. It goes on, right now, the American people have the families of those we lost in our thoughts and prayers. They exemplified America's commitment to freedom, justice, and partnership with nations and people around the globe, and stand in stark contrast to those who callously took their lives. Here's my question for you this morning, as politics has already been injected in this as of yesterday because of some of the messaging that went out. I just want to begin with Mitt Romney's statement on what happened. Let me just quote him, quote his campaign. Quote, "I am outraged by the attacks on American diplomatic missions in Libya and Egypt and by the death of an American consulate worker in Benghazi. It is disgraceful that the Obama administration's first response was not to condemn attacks on our diplomatic missions, but to sympathize with those who waged the attacks." Now, to be clear, that the embassy statement from Cairo actually came out before the protest. They came out after they knew about the film, before the protest. So just to be clear on that. And so Ben LaBolt with the Obama, if I may, sir, let me just finish. The Obama campaign response was this: "We are shocked at a time when the United States of America is confronting the tragic death of one of our diplomatic officers in Libya, Governor Romney would choose to launch a political attack." Speaker Gingrich, is this really time for politics here?
Well, first of all, if you're going to do timelines, I think Governor Romney issued that statement before we knew the American ambassador had been killed.
Absolutely.
That's correct. Absolutely.
So you can be shocked. You can be shocked that the Obama campaign was twisting the facts, but that's not that. Here's the thing for Americans.
How was the
Obama
campaign twisting the facts?
They were suggesting that he was issuing a statement at a time when the ambassador had been killed, when it's clear that Governor Romney didn't know he'd been killed when he issued the statement.
We knew of a death. We knew of a death in Benghazi.
But let me go a step further.
Go ahead.
We had an opportunity yesterday to teach the Muslim world about freedom. We had an opportunity to stand up and say, you know, it's true. Some people in the United States might make a film that's totally whacked out. I mean, I'm a Christian. I've spent all my lifetime being lectured that there's artistic freedom, that people can do things to the image of Christ, and we are not supposed to be offended because, after all, we have artistic freedom. Well, sooner or later, we in the modern world have to say to those who are living in a different way, look, we stand for freedom. And that means that we shouldn't give in. Read exactly what the statement said yesterday from the American Embassy, and it was precisely the wrong message to give to the Muslim world, because we ought to be standing for freedom and not be kowtowing.
I have that, Speaker Gingrich. Let me just go ahead and read it if our viewers aren't familiar. U.S. Embassy in Cairo statement, quote, the Embassy of the U.S. in Cairo condemns the continuing efforts by misguided individuals to hurt the religious feelings of Muslims, as we condemn efforts to offend believers of all religions. Respect for religious beliefs is a cornerstone of American democracy. We firmly reject the actions by those who abuse the universal right of free speech to hurt the religious belief of others. And the administration confirmed with Politico that statement had not gone through Washington. Therefore, the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, ultimately issued a statement. But back to Governor Romney, back to him. Should he be walking back any of his statement today?
No.
Why not?
Governor Romney's statement's pretty clear. If Governor Romney were president, he would be enraged at the Egyptians for tolerating the attack on the embassy. He would be offended at the Libyans for allowing an attack on the embassy. Host countries have an obligation to protect our embassies. This is exactly like 1979 in Iran, when we ended up in a hostage crisis. Egypt has an obligation to protect our embassy. Libya has an obligation to protect our embassy. And frankly, maybe it's because I'm a conservative. Maybe it's because I come out of a different background. But when the American flag is torn down and destroyed, when an American ambassador and 3 other Americans are killed, my reaction is not to find some way to be pleasant and understanding and caring about the people who are killing Americans, tearing down our flag, and assaulting our country. My reaction, frankly, is to be pretty militant and say,
Mr. Speaker,
we ought to stand up for America.
Hang on, it's John Berman here again. That statement happened before any of the violence. It happened before the demonstrations. It happened before the killings. It happened before the American flag was torn down. Let's just be clear about that right now.
So let me ask you this. By what right does an American official in a foreign country get involved in freedom of speech issues in the United States against freedom of speech? I mean, read the opening part of the statement, which suggests that, in effect, we should somehow be apologizing. This is a film nobody has seen, done by somebody nobody understands. That's what America was all about, was people were supposed to be free. We should be defending and explaining freedom, not kowtowing to whatever local religious fanatic group decides they're offended by something. And I don't think there's any circumstance where an American official should be censoring and condemning American free speech on behalf of people who happen to be irritated by it.
Mr. Speaker, hang on one second. Elise Labott at the State Department can give us some context to that initial statement from Cairo.
John, it's true what Politico was said, and we had known this yesterday. That statement was not cleared from Washington, and there was a lot of talk yesterday about the fact that the embassy sent out that statement and really kind of flies in the face of what U.S. values are. We have been talking about the fact that while the U.S. makes clear that it does not take sides with any race or religion, and it really tries to promote religious intolerance, which is religious tolerance, excuse me, which has been a very big priority of Secretary Clinton and the State Department. They did not believe that statement espoused U.S. values because it did fly in the face of what the Americans think about free speech. Secretary Clinton has said that an election does not a democracy make, and part of a democracy is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and they felt that this statement didn't necessarily reflect those values. Now, I think to make any connection to what happened at the embassy in Cairo, at the embassy in Libya, might be a little stretching, because these things happen like really in succession of one another. That statement came out. The U.S. was expecting protests at the embassy. In addition to that statement, the embassy also sent out a kind of warning to Americans that there could be protests over this film. So certainly that statement kind of apologizing, as some would say, if you would, rumpled feathers. But to say that it caused that stampede on either of the embassies, I think might be stretching just a bit.
All right, our Elise Labott in Washington. Mr. Speaker, Speaker Newt Gingrich in Washington also. Thank you both very much for bringing us up to date right now. Brooke, let's remind people what's going on
Let's
this morning.
just go ahead and reset here at the bottom of the hour. The breaking news here coming out of the Middle East. It is both out of Libya and out of Egypt specifically. We now know the U.S. ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, and 3 other embassy staff members are dead. They were killed in this rocket attack, apparently targeting the ambassador's car. The group was heading to a safer location after protesters attacked the U.S. consulate in Benghazi and opened fire. That violence was in protest to that amateur online film produced in the U.S. that offended millions of Muslims. We want to bring in right now CNN contributor Fran Townsend on the phone in Washington, D.C. Fran worked in the White House in the Bush administration on Homeland Security. And Fran, you were talking yesterday a lot about the connection between what was going on in Cairo and Libya. You were saying these protests represented really a tremendous amount of activity, too much to be a coincidence on September 11th. Now, on top of that, we have the assassination of the U.S. ambassador to Libya.
John, let me just step back for a second. I should tell you that I was with Ambassador Chris Stevens not 2 weeks ago. I was in Tripoli on a business trip. He was not only a friend, but I think to give our viewers some context, Chris Stevens had a particular sort of affinity for Benghazi. He had been to DCM in 2007 when I was in the White House and visited. He was there with me when I traveled to speak with Gaddafi. And then he left Libya. He went back. At the height of the fighting, he was with the rebels in Benghazi before there was sort of an official consulate and establishment there, and that obviously prior to being appointed as ambassador. He knew Benghazi. He knew the rebels in Benghazi. He felt very comfortable there. I mean, this was not your typical sort of navy blue suit, starched white shirt ambassador. This is a guy who was a real professional, who rolled his sleeves up, who wanted to help the Libyans get the freedom that they had fought for. And so it's an extraordinary loss, not only for the State Department and obviously Chris's family. It's a loss for the country.
By all accounts,
Libya, I mean, my own experience there had been Libya was in a very fragile security situation and really needs the attention and support of the international community. And so, look, unfortunately, it will now get the attention it needed before this tragedy. It'll get it now because of it.
Right, Fran, by all accounts, Chris Stevens was a very special man with a very special affinity to Libya. He was a key part in the American role there over the last year and a half as the rapid changes were happening there in the Arab Spring. What does his death then today signify to you? Well,
look, I think we have supported the freedom movement, especially in Libya. We supported the strikes, and we were a part of the effort by NATO. But it's not enough, right? It's not enough to help people actually get their freedom, overthrow an oppressive government. You're going to have to come in behind them and help them as a fledgling democracy get the first indication of a working democracy is that it can protect its own people. And Libya's struggling. I mean, I was there, right? The army is trying to take in the militia elements. The Ministry of Interior and Border Guards are trying to get the equipment they need. And the attention of the international community, quite frankly, it was clear to me, has turned elsewhere. There are hotspots in Syria. There are hotspots around the world where we're engaged our intention with the Iran nuclear program. And everyone has Libya fell off people's attention. And I must tell you, if we don't want to see these sorts of tragedies, we need to have a longer attention span and commit ourselves to helping fledgling democracies get up and running and be able to protect their own people and our establishments in their country.
Fran, I think you bring up a great point because we, covered the revolution in Libya so thoroughly for so many months. And my lasting images of the gold revolver, right, and learning that Muammar Gaddafi had been killed. But since then, what has happened in Libya? Where have we been for the last couple of months? Where have they been?
Well, that's exactly right. And so you could tell in talking to people both in the Libyan government and at the U.S. Embassy that there have been real concerns. There's a city called Derna, a city east of Benghazi, where there's a growing extremist element there. And people talked to me about that while I was there, that this group in Derna, this al-Qaeda Islamist extremist group, was gaining strength and numbers, and they were moving west. You know, the next big city is Benghazi. I mean, I give Chris Stephens offered to take me with him to Benghazi, and I couldn't because I wasn't going to be on the ground long enough.
Wow.
I give him tremendous credit. He was willing to go there to talk to folks and to try to help them. But one individual alone, and even with the embassy staff, I mean, I don't want to misstate it. I mean, it's a terrific staff. It's a very strong staff who were very inspired by Chris Stephens' commitment to Libya. But it needs more. It needs a whole-of-government approach. It's what we talked about in Iraq about Phase 4 operations. You can't simply go in and break stuff and overthrow a government, pack up your stuff, and go home and leave the diplomats there. You actually need to do more in terms of the commitment of the international community to help build institutions. Muammar Gaddafi didn't permit institutions, civil institutions. He ruled, he was an autocratic dictator. And we knew that. So when he was overthrown, the new government was going to need support, long-term support. They had their own money from oil.
No, and it sounded like
they needed help building civil institutions.
Sounds like Ambassador Stephens wanted to play an integral role in helping them, helping that support the next chapter, if you will, of Libya and his life tragically cut short. Fran Townsend, we thank you so much for calling in. If you get any more information, obviously call us back. And I just sitting here and listening to her speak, I can't help but think of all the images and all of our coverage out of Benghazi, really the birthplace of the revolution, the rebel movement, the stronghold there. And here it is, the same city in which the ambassador who wanted to help Libyans,
who played such a key role in that,
was killed.
We'll be back in just a moment.